Hello, and welcome to the Office of the Patriot. In this office, we try to make sense out of the nonsense of the progressive left and RINO right. In the office today, we're going to be discussing a carryover from last week's episode, our federal government's fiscal policy and how it affects us as we near the dreaded federal income tax due date for fiscal year 2023. Also, is the American dream dead? For thousands of Americans who are looking for their very first home, they might feel it is, and we have some data to support this belief. All this and a bit more in this episode of Office of the Patriot.
Where's all your money gone, Donnie?
Taxes.
6, 9, 10, 11. Let me fix my houses.
Bug, it's okay. It's part of the game.
No, it's not.
It's
not fun.
It's not fun to what?
It's the worst part of the game.
Oh, it's what?
Taxes.
Damn, I feel that young man's pain about taxes. More specifically, income taxes. I saw a meme last week that kind of made me laugh. It was posed as a tongue-in-cheek question, but it's still a valid question. If our government can print money whenever it wants to, then why do they need to tax us? Well, because unlike a monopoly or the monopoly game where money has no value beyond what's paid for the game, our currency has to have some intrinsic value that other people will recognize and accept as payment. This requires all citizens to have faith in the currency being used. This is referred to as fiat money. No, not the car manufacturer Fiat. Fiat as in an order or decree, and in this case, a government decree that our currency has value, and value is recognized by our government's authority to tax citizens who make up the nation's economy. The economy produces X value, which is a measurement of total economic output for our economy. And the measurement for X is the gross domestic product, which is the value of all goods and services. More specifically, the value of all goods and services produced within the country. We're in the first quarter of 2024 measurement, so to be fair, I will use fiscal year 2023. Total GDP for 2023 was $27.96 trillion, and that's a hell of a lot of money. And how much money did our federal government take of that? Well, in the year 2022, our federal government collected $5.03 trillion in revenue, with over $2.6 trillion coming from income tax, which accounts for 52% of all revenue collected. Who made this money? Well, if you look at our census, we have just over 340 million people in the United States, yet just under 165 million tax returns were filed. Roughly 45% of the population paid taxes. Now, I understand there is a significant amount of the population that would be tax exempt, like children, for instance, but I'm sure they don't make up 55% of the population. So it appears that our tax system, specifically our graduated income tax system, is based off of revenue generated by 45% of the population, which means that we're paying twice as much as we should be paying. That's point number one. The next point is that the current tax system is bullshit. Progressive tax, which is what our income taxes are based off of, essentially punishes citizens for success. The more money you make, the more taxes you owe. Flat tax does away with this by taxing everyone at the same rate. And it's a little bit better, but there's still problems with it. It does disproportionately affect lower income people because whatever that flat tax percentage rate is, let's say for argument it's 10%, and you're only making $40,000 a year, then you would owe $4,000. And if your rent is $1,000 a month, that's a quarter of the year's rent, versus if you're making $400,000 and you pay 10% of that, which would be $40,000 in tax, that still leaves you with $36,000, which is more than enough to cover any mortgage and then some. So my position is to do away with income tax altogether and move to a value-added tax, also known as a VAT. And there are two reasons for this. One, your tax burden will be based on what you purchase. So if you live a frugal life, then your tax burden is going to be pretty small. And if you live an extravagant one, well, you get the picture. Further, taxes now will be collected from everybody in the United States because we are all consumers. This means that the tax burden will not only be spread among all citizens, but it also means that you have a measure of control over how much taxes you pay. The next reason is, well, telling, because anytime a progressive liberal advocates for not doing something because it's not fair or equitable, it's probably something that conservatives should embrace. Take a listen to this moron who's advocating for doing away with VAT in the UK and replace it with a progressive tax.
This is why you shouldn't have to pay VAT. No leftist would support a tax cut. Wrong. There are progressive and there are regressive forms of tax. VAT is entirely regressive. Why? Because it's a flat rate tax. That means it doesn't matter how rich you are, everybody pays the same amount. If three is too young. If a 6-year-old goes into a shop and buys a Mars bar, they're going to be paying the same amount of VAT for that Mars bar than if Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos bought it. Now, in what world does a 6-year-old and multi-billionaires pay the same amount of tax? Okay, so we scrap it. What about the shortfall? Well, make that up with progressive forms of taxation. Taxation where it does discriminate in accordance to how wealthy you are. Amend things like capital gains tax, income tax, inheritance tax. You impose a new wealth tax. There's all sorts of great progressive ideas on taxation that promote a far more fair and just society.
Oh God. Okay. It seems to me that we should be paying a really small amount of our income for federal income tax. Number one, safety of the homeland and of the citizens. So we don't want foreign nations invading us and attacking us and killing our people. And then for infrastructure, of course, so roads and bridges, and for a little bit of the national parks, stuff like that. But why we're paying, upwards of 20, 25, 30, 35% is crazy. So why the fuck are we being taxed at such a high rate? We don't have a tax problem.
Absolutely.
We have a spending problem. That's
Absolutely.
been a problem for decades. It kind of started under, I guess it escalated under Reagan, just looking back. But this applies to state budgets as well. We're just, deficit spending is just out of control and it's causing massive inflation. So we know that, federal government they're completely inefficient. They're incompetent to say the least. And, in many respects, we're basically a socialist country at this point with all the safety nets, social safety nets, and a lot of them, people love them. They want them. So we're kind of stuck with them, unfortunately. And then now we got Obamacare, since Obama forced that through. All the Democrats forced that on us, and if you don't have insurance, you get penalized. So you have to end up paying more tax to the government if you don't pay for a minimum insurance, which is absolutely nuts. Makes absolutely no sense. And then we're sending money to foreign nations, and we have military bases all over the world. We still act like we're an expanding empire when we're actually a shrinking empire. We don't have a GDP that's large enough to support what we're doing around the world, especially giving money away to all these foreign nations. It's driving cryptocurrency through the roof. It's driving oil, precious metals. Basically, commodities are going through the roof. That's causing further inflation on top of what's causing the inflation to begin with, which is a spending problem. And we're still the global reserve currency. So all the countries still use the US dollar as a form of currency. But I'm scared because if what happens, and I'm pretty sure it's going to happen in our lifetimes, probably in the next 10 to 15 years, is another nation or group of nations. They're already, we've heard of BRICS. So there's a group of countries that are joining that, and they're trying to basically have their own form of currency and do away with the U.S. standard. So that means there's going to be less U.S. dollars, like 100 times less U.S. dollars being used for global currency trading, and that's going to cause a massive crap in our just that alone will cause a massive
Definitely.
crater in our economy with all that money being basically dumping. So basically, think of I don't even know how much it is, but in my mind, it could be a 500% increase in our money supply, which would drive inflation to the moon. We'd be like Venezuela paying $50 for a loaf of bread or $100 for a half a gallon of milk. It's absolutely nuts. So we got to rein in federal spending. We can't count on the uniparty to do it, and all the dumbasses that keep putting their faith in the establishment politicians. They continue to keep fucking us over. So it's kind of hopeless, but I don't know. Hopefully things will change.
I absolutely agree. I don't know anybody that makes a budget that only considers income coming in and not expenses going out. And that's what our federal government has been doing. But that's an entire whole can of worms and likely a future topic. So the next topic, is the American dream dead in the United States? It's a topic that has been in the minds of pretty much every American at one time or another. And given the volatility of our housing and real estate markets, especially today, it's an almost impossible question to answer. In this next clip by NBC, they discuss some of the new issues or the issues new homebuyers are facing today.
First-time homebuyers made up the smallest percentage ever last year, only about 25%. So why is that happening? And more importantly, is it going to change? NBC News correspondent Sam Brock has the story.
In housing markets all over the country, big and small, coastal and inland, there's a riddle that first-time homebuyers like Kevin Lederer of Orlando are trying to solve.
When did your reality come crashing down on trying to buy a house?
About 2 years ago when I started making offers and getting outbid nonstop.
How do you navigate higher home prices, stiff competition, and now an uptick in interest rates all climbing in the last few years? Increasingly, the answer for millions is simple. You don't.
Everyone has the hope of owning a house. Is this shattering that illusion for many families?
Somewhat, yeah. Being a 31-year-old, recently married, having our first child, raising a family, like you want to have that American dream of having a home that you can build a family in.
It's not as if Kevin, who works in private investigative services, and his wife Hayden, a 28-year-old wedding coordinator, haven't been trying. The new parents saved up for a down payment for years and collectively make just under $200,000 annually. Still, it's not enough.
The typical first-time home buyer, the share actually dropped to the lowest level we've ever recorded in our 41-year history of the report. We also saw that the age jumped to the highest we've ever seen before.
To give you some better perspective, just over a quarter of homes sold between July of 2021 and the end of June 2022 were purchased by first-time buyers. That's a dramatic drop from the historic benchmark of 40%. And the average age, normally around Kevin and Hayden's, is now up to 36. Housing experts say part of the problem can be traced to rents soaring along with inflation, sapping savings, as well as the fact that first-time homebuyers aren't facing an even playing field.
Before the pandemic, the same sort of houses that you were looking at, that you were unable to buy, how much would they have cost?
$250,000, $275,000. Now,
how much are they now?
Close to $400,000.
And the younger generation needs more help than ever to get a down payment. The latest National Association of Realtor numbers show more than a quarter are staying with friends or family to save for a down payment. And the majority are making sacrifices, cutting back on luxury goods, clothes, and entertainment to save up.
I remember when I bought my first house, and back then it stretched the limits of my meager law enforcement salary. I believe I was making right around $250 or $2,500 a month and paying around $475 a month in rent. So income taxes came due, and then I found out that I owed even after claiming single and none. So I knew it was time to jump into the housing market. My first house, a 1,135 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath trend home, which is essentially a cookie cutter home made from maybe a Maytag box with a little bit of insulation, drywall, and stucco. The cost, $69,000. And I worked on that house day in and day out for the 11 years I owned it. And when I sold it, I walked away with $112,000. It was difficult back then to buy a house, but it wasn't impossible. Watching this next video makes me think of Patrick Swayze in Ghost.
Second verse, same as the first. I am really I am, and really I am, I am. I got married to the widow next door.
All right, all right, all right. Stop singing. I'll go anywhere you want to. Just don't sing anymore.
Second verse, same as the first. Funny as hell, and because it pisses off leftist Whoopi Goldberg to the point of hysteria, that makes it all the more enjoyable to watch. Okay, back to the subject at hand. Maybe it's just me, but it appears kids nowadays, yeah, I say kids, I'm quite a bit older than the couple portrayed in the prior video. It appears that these kids have an expectation that their first house is going to be this big, beautiful home because that's what their parents currently reside in. No, I don't get it. Hell, my kids have even forgotten the struggles we endured, or maybe they really never even understood them. For whatever reason, our children believed until they were young adults that their mother and I actually had a savings account in the event of emergencies. Yeah, okay. If you consider a credit card a savings account, we had a few of those. When we informed them that we didn't actually start saving money until after they moved out, their eyes popped out of their damn heads. This new generation doesn't appear to be comfortable with the idea of being uncomfortable, at least for a period of time. Now, I do agree that there are some roadblocks that this new generation has when purchasing their new home that we didn't. First, there weren't as many real estate investment firms buying up whole phases of new builds just to either rent them out or hoard them for profits later on. This is especially problematic when the builder is marketing towards the first-time home buyer, and this cuts down inventory. And right now, with interest rates back up to where they were when I first purchased my home, that home at $69,000 at 7% had me at a PITI payment of $695 a month. Starter home costs are now hovering in the high threes and low fours right now. So these homes will likely have the same PITI payment hitting the high 2,000s, low $3,000 a month mark. And I will be frank, those costs would price me out of a new starter home today.
Yep. So I've been following this for a couple years, and I saw a recent report about mainly it focused on corporations like BlackRock, but it would also focused on all these REITs, which are real estate investment trusts. So they're basically things that you and I or anybody with some money can invest in. Some of them are privately owned. So let's say there's a bunch of wealthy people, they want to start buying properties. So that's what they've been doing. And this report was kind of staggering. It was as many as 10% of all single family homes bought and sold, primarily being bought and then rented out, were from these REITs, these real estate investment trusts. And BlackRock is in there because they have some REIT funds that you can invest in. So they're focusing on the agenda. In my opinion, the agenda from the World Economic Forum and the establishment, the globalists, they want us to own nothing and be happy. So basically, they want 99% of the people to be renters, and the wealthy people own everything, and that includes primarily things that we need, like real estate, places to live. So, yeah, BlackRock is the most evil corporation in the world. They fucking suck. I fucking hate them. They're awful. They're the biggest multinational asset manager in the world. They have the most funds. Basically, they're the wealthiest corporation in existence.
Agreed. Them and JP Morgan Chase.
That's scary. Yeah, I mean, they have $10 trillion under management. That's insane. That's what, 5 times our gross GDP or close to it. I was thinking of the taxes. Yeah, sorry. Tax. I was thinking of the tax revenues that you were referring to. Yeah, absolutely. Um, so all these young people and even like folks like you and I, if we're looking to sell our house and then buy another one, we have to compete not only with other, individuals and families, but we're possibly competing with these, all these, corporations that are buying up properties. Some are looking to flip them. Some are looking to rent. Most are looking to rent them out, I believe, because this report that I read, it was staggering. Like they were buying up huge neighborhoods and just rent. So an entire neighborhood was just rented out to everybody. It was crazy.
Again, that's where these issues are coming up. The gentrification issues that we have with regard to some neighborhoods. They over improve them to basically push out people, and then of course they purchase whole phases of these new builds. And like I said, many of these new builds happen to be marketing towards the new home buyer. You'll find some homes, even in California, I remember seeing homes in the high $200,000 range, and so you're like, okay, that's reachable. You'll probably when you outfit it all up, you're looking at about low $300,000 range. Somebody could swing that kind of a payment, dual income, maybe one child, they could probably do it. I mean, it'll be tough. It would be a stretch, but it can be done. And then, of course, these, BlackRock and others are coming in and buying huge swaths of these developments and then, doing whatever they want to do with them. They're sitting on them. I remember my grandfather as a child telling me that, real estate's always going to be a good thing to get into because nobody makes any more land, right? There's a finite amount, and once it's there, and that's it. So it's always going to increase. I mean, there's volatility, obviously, and I think all that volatility comes from artificial inducements, from poor management and greed and a bunch of other things. But as a whole, you're always going to have an increase, which is one of the reasons why, once you start paying on that mortgage, you have that mortgage, you pay it off, you do 30 years and you bought a house. And I'm sure you can remember back, probably talking to your parents when they bought their houses because you were in the North Bay area. House back then when they were buying was, probably pretty reasonable, $100,000, $150,000. And now you can't even drive down a neighborhood in the Bay Area, Petaluma or Mountain View or any of those for $150,000. These homes are going for $1 million plus. So it's always there's always going to be an increase.
Yeah, my parents' first home was they bought it in '72 for $68,000, somewhere around there. Yeah, so, and they sold it for about $450,000.
And right now, when they sold that house, if you were to look at that house value right now, I'm willing to bet you that it's double that. And even without any improvements, if we were still looking at the original structure with the land that it's on. So again, and it's only going to go higher. I don't know that we're going to ever have a cap when it comes to land. And so it's always going to be a good investment. You just have to be able to ride it out. I remember talking to a real estate agent a long time ago. They said, honestly, when you own a home value doesn't mean crap until you're ready to buy or you're ready to sell. Otherwise, as long as you can make the stroke that you're obligated to make, then you're good to go and you just keep on. And if all people started doing that as opposed to worrying about what their house value is every time, the wind shifts with regard to financial markets, then I think we'd have a little bit more stable housing economy. So, but that's just me.
Yep. Yeah, I think I hadn't thought about this until you brought that up. But so I had an uncle who was big time into real estate, and he said, don't focus on the price. Just get into the real estate. You don't want to buy at a super high price, at that current time, but get into the market. If you have to pay a high interest rate, don't worry about it, because if you, like you said, if you can make the payments within the next 5 to 10 years. Interest rates fluctuate a lot, so they will come down. You can get a refi that drops your payments way down, and then you're basically locked in. So,
and that
it is tough initially, but it gets easier.
And that brings me back to my original position or my original comment when we talked about earlier, was that today a lot of these younger kids, these younger couples, just don't have the wherewithal to do some of the things that they, and I'm generalizing here, because obviously there are some younger couples that are making things work, and they're eating their top ramen, and they're frying their hot dogs down the middle, cutting them, and the things that we used to have to do just to be able to survive. And they're doing it happily because they know that this sacrifice now is going to pay dividends later. And right now, like I said, it seems that more of these kids, more of these couples, these millennials and these Gen Zers are just uncomfortable, or they're not comfortable with the idea of being uncomfortable, at least for a period of time. And honestly, I think that's what makes everything worth it at the very end. I remember my trend home. I hated that house when we first bought it. I mean, we had so much work to do on it. And it was a great little house, but I have some of the fondest memories of it. And just again, when I moved to my second home and you came over to that house quite often, we have pool parties and everything. And when I bought the house, it was pretty rough. And then we had some work. A little bit of sweat equity is never a bad thing. And just those two holding on to them, making the strokes, doing what I had to do, enabled me to move to where I'm at now, into the office of the Patriot. So I'm blessed, but it had to do with a little bit of tenacity. And if our kids, just understood that and embraced it and said, okay, well, you know what, it's time to tighten the belt. I'm not going to be driving the fancy car. We had I want to say my wife and our first car that we had for the kids was a Chevy Spectrum. So, I mean, there is that. I got rid of my little track cars, and you just have to do what you have to do to be able to get through the next day, because, if you make smart decisions, they'll eventually pan out. Yeah.
Yep.
So,
yeah, I mean, we could even bring inflation into this, because inflation is so nefarious. I mean, it's the new home builders, especially, they're struggling. Like you said, they're trying to design a house at a certain price point so they can, bring in, young people, first time home buyers. And now they're paying, 15% more for lumber, everything is more expensive.
Well, I mean,
so they have to factor all that in. They have to pay the workers more money.
So,
The labor costs have gone up because now there's labor inflation. Everybody wants, $20 an hour to flip burgers. So that everybody's riding that wave. It's just like,
again, we both
it's
know
insane. It's fucking nuts what's happening.
Of the Democrat Party, and you spoke to that earlier. This is the way it's going to make people aren't voluntarily going to give up their possessions. They're not voluntarily going to give up their homes. They're not voluntarily going to go to an electric vehicle, right? They're not voluntarily going to do these things because that would mean giving up a comfort, and people aren't willing to give up comfort unless you make it either A, attractive to them, or B, you force them out of it. Well, it's going to be hard to make it attractive. You can get some celebrities, and you can get you can get a few people to kind of sign on and kind of push people, and you'll get some people to fall in. But for the most part, you're going to have to force people. It is the government's goal. I mean, because you cannot control people unless you have control of their money, which, obviously moving to digital currency, the taxation, the tax systems that we have, controlling transportation, when and where they can leave, controlling where they live, controlling their food. And the government has their hands in every single one of those aspects: energy, healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. So it's basically layers within layers of deceit and manichations, or what's the word I want to use? Basically just deceit by the uniparty government that we have for the purposes of control. That is, unless Americans as a whole just put their foot down and say enough is enough. It's going to take a concerted effort, but it can be done. Yeah. However, how and when will be up to you guys. This concludes today's presentation of Office of the Patriot. If you enjoy the content, please take the time to like, subscribe, and share our channel on your social media. It is appreciated. Also, please take the time to comment. Engagement is the major metric social media platforms like YouTube and Rumble employ in their search algorithms. The more people that like and comment, the more this channel will come up when social and political content like ours is searched for. And as always, have a blessed day and stay safe out there.